There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Well, I am home, and you are listening to the Retirement Answer Man Show. Well, hey there. Welcome to the show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. And if you're new here, this show is dedicated to not just helping you figure out the business side of retirement so you can survive it financially, but also to deal with the entire picture so you can have that dialed in so you can lean in and have the confidence to, well, rock retirement, which is more than the business side. And it is great to be home. I like recording in my studio. I'm not a big fan of recording sitting on a mattress with Sherlock snoring next to me, although it was very cute. And we're going to continue with this series on just answering your listener questions, not just because this show is about you. Before we get started, though, I want to direct you to doretirementright.com. Nicole, Monkey Dog, myself, and the team put together a resource called Inflation in Retirement, 6 Tactics to Consider. So it's just a little guide to help you get your arms around how to make decisions dealing with inflation during retirement. Now, this is very approachable. There's not going to be tons of facts and figures and research. This is practical ways to help you think through the issues. So you can get that resource. And also it'll sign you up for our 6-Shot Saturday email, which is our weekly summary, at doretirementright.com. Now, here's what we're going to do today. I want to talk about some insights from my time in Colorado. I want to bring back some book recommendations because I got a lot of emails from you listeners with some book ideas. So I want to share a few of those. And then we're going to go answer a number of your questions on, should I get a mortgage in retirement? What about social responsible funds? And what are my thoughts on that? Dividend sources and a lot of different topics. So let's get started. Today's show is sponsored by the Rock Retirement Club, our online platform to give you a framework, help you build a retirement plan of record, and give you the resources and the coaching so you can implement it and actually have a process, not just on the financial side, but the non-financial side in order to rock retirement. It includes a masterclass to walk you through step-by-step creating your plan of record, gives you world-class retirement planning software, as well as a community and my team, access to my team to help you on this journey. We're going to have open enrollment because we only open it up a few times a year in late October, and you can learn more at rockretirementclub.com. So before we get started with answering your questions, I wanted to share some insights from our time in Colorado that might assist you on your journey. So to give you some backstory, if you're not familiar, my wife and I, we live in Fort Worth, Texas. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we've gone to Colorado for about a month every year. We rent a house via VRBO, and we've always rented roughly in the same area. And then we explore out, and this is in Salida, Colorado. And the reason we do this is, one, we're exploring where we may want to relocate ultimately. I'm not retiring anytime soon, if ever. But we live in Texas. We know we love the mountains. Shauna has psoriatic arthritis, so she feels better at altitude and drier places. And we're surrounded by a lot of the things that we love to do. So we've been going to Salida for 4 or 5 years. And then last year we bought a lot with the intention of building a house and having a part-time house and then ultimately moving there and selling our home in Fort Worth. And so this was our 4th or 5th time. We were there for 6 weeks, our longest time. We rented a house. And here are just some thoughts on this journey of figuring out about where we're going to relocate ultimately now that we have more freedom with our kids launched. So number one, first insight from Roger is what we love about what we've done is we really have affirmed or confirmed that it makes sense to set yourself up for things that you enjoy. And for us, being in Colorado sets the stage for us to go do things very easily. The other day, I had a meeting in the morning because this was a work day in Colorado. And then I had a meeting like 3 hours later. And I literally could ride outside my door, go on an hour and a half mountain bike ride, and come back and work the rest of the day. So there wasn't a lot of logistical issues involved because we were right there. The Arkansas River was right there. Hiking, we had a little trail around a pond with beautiful views of the mountains. I hiked Mount Yale. We did a lot of things that were very accessible without a lot of friction. And so whatever your passions are, whether that's boating or kayaking or hiking or going to plays and being in a vibrant city, one thing we realize that we don't have where we live that this area gives us is it sets ourselves up to do things that we enjoy very easily. And I think that's important, especially in retirement when you have an abundance of time to go pursue things you enjoy. That's number one. Number two, the second insight that I affirmed was that it's much easier, at least for us, to make friends and acquaintances in towns like in small towns. We live in the burbs of Fort Worth, and Fort Worth isn't a huge town anyway. But when you're surrounded by freeways and work and just the bustle of the city and everybody going about their lives, it's very difficult to make connections. And what we found in the Salida or this area of Colorado, and I'm sure this is true in lots of other places in the world, everyone is much more open to having a casual conversation and inviting people over and just being interested in making connections. And perhaps it's because there are a lot of transplants that move there. No doubt if you go to Florida or the Villages or Margaritaville in the Carolinas or someplace, these communities, you have the same impact. But we don't find that here in the burbs where everybody is so busy. Number three, and this is just so overused, but just do it. Thanks, Nike, for making that overused, but just do things. It's true, acting a lot of times is better than thinking too much about things, especially when it comes to activities. I'll use this mountain bike example. I vacillated. I played with this for like a half an hour. Like, well, could I? Maybe I shouldn't. It'd be fun, but over and over again. And finally I said, I'm just going to do it. And I went and did it, and it all worked out. It's so easy to think about doing things, whether that's preparing for retirement or taking your spouse out on a date or saying hello to someone that you see every day at the coffee shop. It's so easy to think about things rather than just doing it. Generally, we won't have regrets. We regret the things that we don't do is pretty much what every study says. Fourth insight is it's much harder to make great decisions when your heart is involved and when you are the center of your own drama/comedy or story. I consider myself a pretty good decision maker. And last year we bought a lot in Colorado in this little town called Poncha Springs, and this beautiful lot. And we went and met with the architect and the builder this year. And when we walked the lot, it was like, the architect and builder, like, there's going to be a lot of dirt that has to be moved in to make this a buildable lot. They were pointing out all these things that we maybe knew on the peripheral, but we minimized because we wanted to buy something that represents the fact that we want to move there. And in hindsight, we might have done that prematurely. And then during the stay, a lot in the same area came for sale that was just so much better than the lot that we had. It didn't have all the groundwork that was going to cost a significant amount of money. It had better views, just a lot of different things. And we actually went through the process of pivoting, and now we're going to sell this lot. Now, if I had been advising myself over the last 2 or so years, I may have avoided some of that and been a little bit more careful in the decision-making. In hindsight, now this is hindsight talking, right? Because the other lot wasn't for sale. This current lot, even though it needed all that dirt work, probably would have been a great lot for us. But the point is, it's very difficult to gain perspective, especially when it's your own life, even if you slow down, because you're the center of the drama. You have your noggin above is intertwined with the thing right in the middle of your chest, and we rationalize a lot of things very easily. And I did some debrief after we walked this journey. I did some writing and debrief for myself of, okay, well, what happened? It's not a disaster, but it's friction. What happened that caused this to go this way and tried to learn some lessons just to improve my decision. But my point is, it's so hard when you're in the center of the story. Just something to remember. I'm reading a book right now called Red Teaming. Speaking of books, I don't know if I mentioned that. I'm in the middle of reading that, which is a concept of, and they do it in the military. In fact, Scott Sanborn, who's a financial planner for us, actually worked with the general that spearheaded this concept in the military, which is you bring in a team that basically question everything, all the assumptions and groupthink that went on, to not to just simply rain on the parade, but to gain perspective so things that might not have been considered or have been diminished can be brought to light to have a fuller picture of the situation. You can imagine in the military, that's pretty important. So I'm reading that book as part of my journey to my better decision-making. Fifth insight was 6 weeks, which we spent in a house, about 1,900 square foot house, beautiful home, one house away from the Arkansas River. But 6 weeks in someone else's house doesn't feel like home. And although we enjoyed it, it didn't feel like home. It wasn't my couch. It wasn't all the things. Functionally, it was perfect. It just wasn't home. Home is an important base. It doesn't matter if you're a full-time RVer, that's your home. Your home, your personal environment is pretty important. And then a buddy of mine, we're talking, Mark Trobman, who will be on the show actually, who is a certified financial planner, but doesn't work professionally. He works for service. Reminded me of something, and I forget where this quote came from. He was, I believe, quoting someone else, but spend big on important things and be ruthless with everything else in terms of spending. And I really like that concept. Like for me, spending big on a mountain bike is important to me because it's a vehicle to get me out into nature. But spending big, or I need to be more ruthless, and always, all of us, be ruthless with the things that you don't really need to spend money on. So you can have that balance. It's not about not spending or spending. It's about spending that is aligned with what you actually care about. So those are some insights from my trip to Colorado. Now, let's pivot a little bit. Last week, I talked about the books that I had finished, and I got a lot of emails. So I thought I'd share some books from listeners that emailed in that maybe will add to your list. Carol said, Building a Second Brain by Tiago, Tiago Forte, Forte. Check that one out. John says, if you're interested in the revolutionary period, My Dear Hamilton is a book, and it's written from the viewpoint of Alexander Hamilton's wife, Eliza Schuyler Hamilton. Thanks, John. Steve says you might like The Path Between the Seas, a fascinating, he says, very well-written story by a U.S. historian that just passed away about the largest man-made project in history. That does sound interesting. Thanks, Steve. Jay says a book called All That Moves Us. Haven't looked at that one, but I wanted to share it. Elizabeth says 5 Presidents by Clint Hill. Clint, I guess, is the Secret Service agent whose career serving presidents was 5 presidents, starting with Eisenhower, and he was the first person to reach Mrs. Kennedy after the shooting. John shared his entire 2022 reading list, so I'll check that out and share some of those boats. And then Williams also shared a book called The Boys in the Boat, 9 Americans and Their Epic Quest for Gold at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. So we may have to just start a Google page where we start to share some reading because there's a lot of great books to check out. Now with that, let's move on to your questions. So we try to answer some of your questions every show, but this week we're focusing more on your questions since we don't have a theme. Now, if you have a question for the show, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger, and you can type in a question or you can leave an audio question. And FYI, if you leave an audio question, that's like the fast pass at Disney World. We try to elevate audio questions so you have a better chance of getting your question answered on the show. So you can check that out. Our first question is one that we promised to answer, and it is not an audio question, but it's about a mortgage in retirement. So this question comes from, doesn't say, which is totally cool. But it says, I've been enjoying your podcast for 6 months now. Thank you. My wife and I enter retirement in 6 months at age 58 and 60. We've been very careful with our money over the decades and have been mortgage and debt-free since 2009. We would like to build a final home in the next year or so. The home will cost us twice the value of our current home. To smooth our retirement and investment account withdrawals, we are looking at a mortgage, which is a bit strange for two very debt-averse people. The mortgage payment will be less than 20% of our guaranteed annual pension income. What do you have in terms of advice before signing the documents to build the castle in the sky? Hey, it sounds like you might be in Colorado or someplace. That's a great question. I am not averse to having a mortgage in retirement. So the way I would suggest that you approach this is, first, have a plan of record. Hopefully you have a retirement planning process where you've outlined what your base great life is and what your discretionary wishes and wants are, and organized your resources so you have a plan for how you're going to, say, pay for life without a mortgage, and then have that plan of record that is both feasible financially, but also resilient and maybe somewhat optimized. That is table stakes, in my opinion, when you're asking almost any retirement question, is you need to have that in place. If you don't have that in place, you don't even have the table set up to be able to organize things. Because once you have that set up, what I would suggest that you do is you run two scenarios, one with paying cash for this house, either initially or over a very short period of time, depending on the sequence of you selling your current home, and then one using a mortgage. And I would suggest that you look at a 30-year fixed mortgage. I wouldn't do shorter than that because this is a cash flow issue more than it is pay my debt off early issue. You can always pay it off early, but we're focused on cash flow management. So a fixed lower payment is pretty attractive. So you would want to create a scenario where you show both. Now, what are some items that you want to look for? Well, one is obviously, are they both feasible? And in a retirement case, one of the bigger issues, especially when you're building a bigger house, is if you are going to pay cash, where are you going to get the money from? If you are like most people and most of your assets are in tax-deferred accounts, 401ks and IRAs, at 58 and 60, that's probably where you focus saving most. Then if you're saying you need $500,000 to fund the difference in this house, where is that $500,000 going to come from in this example? If it's going to come from your after-tax assets, how much after-tax assets do you have left after you pay the money needed for this house so you can be debt-free? Because if that depletes your after-tax assets, now you're in a much less flexible position going forward. Because if you've depleted your after-tax assets, if you need to draw money from your assets to buy the furniture that goes into the house, to fix the AC, etc., or if you just need it to help supplement your lifestyle over above your pension income, likely that's going to have to come from IRAs, pre-tax assets in this example, which is going to cause a taxable event, which could impact your taxes because of pensions and other things. You're going to have less flexibility of where you go to get money if you deplete your after-tax assets. It's probably the most concise way to see it. Now, maybe you have ample after-tax resources, and that's not the case, which is that might lean you to, well, maybe we can handle this and still have some balance between our tax categories. Now, what if you don't have a lot of after-tax assets, which a lot of people don't, relative to 401ks and pre-tax assets? This theoretical $500,000 that you need to fund this, what would you call it, the castle in the sky, would have to come from pre-tax assets or your IRA or 401k. So if you need $500,000 to pay for this castle and you don't have after-tax assets, then you're going to have to draw it from an IRA, which means you'll have to gross it up because you're going to have to pay taxes on that distribution. So it's actually going to cost you more than $500,000. And that could cause issues with IRMA or other things down the line. So you can see how all of this interacts together. And so as a result, you want to treat it in an organized way so you can make a judgment call, because there's not going to be a right answer here. Now, one thing that you mention in your question is that the mortgage payment will be less than 20% of your guaranteed annual income, pension income. So pensions will last for life. That leads me much more to say, yeah, you might want to really look at doing a mortgage, 30-year fixed, because you can always pay it off later, right? If you go the mortgage route, you could keep that mortgage for your entire life, and it's only going to be 20% of your annual pension income, which is a reasonable number, assuming you have other assets as well. And then whether it's next year, the year after, or maybe in a annual basis, you can always pay it off early. So by doing the mortgage, and if you feel comfortable that it's not going to stress your cash flow situation, you can always pivot later on. Whereas if you pay cash for it and you sell assets to fund the amount that you need, or you bring money out of IRAs to fund the amount you need for this castle, you don't really have much flexibility. The deed is done. So I would probably lean more with the facts given to really seriously consider doing a long-term mortgage on it, knowing that because you're going to be agile, that you can always iterate and perhaps pay it off early. And that might give you more flexibility to manage tax brackets, et cetera. But if you don't have a plan of record, you don't have that table set, you're not going to have a solid foundation to really make this judgment call in an organized way. So hopefully that helped answer your question. In practice, I have dealt with this with clients numerous times, and we've done both. We've done both mortgage, pay cash, mortgage, and then pay it off early. We've done multiple different pathways to get to the goal that you're looking for. And I prefer ones that, all things being equal, gives someone more flexibility to make decisions next year and the year after that. All right, let's get to our next question, which is, hey, it's an audio question.
Hey, Roger. Tim here from San Diego, listener of your show for about a year and retired for about the same amount of time. I am calling with a concern that I know a growing number of recent retirees and soon-to-be retirees share these days. Regarding your recent legacy theme, it's not so much about how much money we leave behind for our families, but instead about the kind of world we leave behind for our children, grandchildren, and future generations. I'm referring to wanting our retirement funds to support only companies and ventures engaging in activities that are sustainable and not harmful to the long-term health of the earth. All politics aside, from a purely economic standpoint, for novices like myself, one, how difficult is it to control where your retirement funds are put? And two, in your view, is it too risky to have all or almost all of your funds in companies and ventures that align with your values in this way? I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Thank you for putting out such a helpful and high-quality show each and every week.
That's a really good question, Tim. So let me just share my thoughts with you. And I've thought about this because this has been in my industry something that has been a trend over the last decade or so. So I've been observing it and making my own judgments on it. So I'll tell you exactly where I stand on this, and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. So a lot of what you're referring to in the investment space is something called ESG Investing, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, which are three key factors around sustainability and ethical impact of investments or businesses. And this has been a trend, a growing trend from an investment management standpoint, especially over the last decade or so. I have not participated or used these type of funds unless specifically asked by a client. And over the last decade, we've seen a growing number of ESG options as investment options. Some of them can focus on environment and sustainability. Some of them focus on corporate ethics. And mutual funds and ETFs have come out with products that have screens to choose the companies that they allow in their portfolio. So as an example, let's assume you are an environmentally sensitive person and you, from an investment standpoint, there are ESG funds that would exclude major polluters or nuclear energy from the menu of companies or stocks that they can put into their portfolio. And there are a lot of studies as to whether there's value in that or whether there isn't from a performance standpoint. I don't want to get into that. because it's very easy to play with these statistics, and it's a much newer theme, meaning even 20 years is new from an investment management standpoint. So I don't want to mess with that. And I know recently that there are some state attorney generals and others that are suing ESG type of funds because there's some issues around the fiduciary responsibility that a company has to its investors. And the SEC is coming up with some proposed legislation. So let's put all of that aside and let's look at your question, Tim. One, how difficult is it to do? Well, there are a plethora of ESG-focused ETFs and mutual funds, which will give you a one-shot diversified portfolio. And they're all going to have their own screens as to what they're targeting, whether it's more environmental or social or governance or all of the above. So it's not difficult to find those type of funds. It is difficult to understand the methodology and agree with everything they're doing. So from that perspective, no, it's not difficult to get a portfolio that has some filter that in theory helps build a better world. The difficulty, I think, Tim, is that this is an interconnected web of companies. There is no one pure company that is doing it right. We'll use Exxon as an example. That is the largest petroleum company in the world. I believe it is. They pump and drill for gas and oil, but they spend significant amount of money on electric and clean energy and other things. So at the surface, they look like they're a bad guy, but they do a lot of great things. And then there are great companies that look, say, socially conscious that also do other things. So there's definitely been a coming together of political positions and corporate governance. And that is in the middle innings of where does this all play out? So it can be very difficult, even in an ESG fund. You'll look at companies, well, why the heck is that in there? That looks like it, I don't like that company. I would never buy their product. I think you're creating junk for kids or whatever it is. So I don't think it's easy from that perspective, but you definitely have a large and growing menu of ETFs and mutual funds. Now, to your question, is it too risky to invest all of your investment assets in these type of more socially, in theory, I'm using air quotes here, socially conscious companies? I don't think it is, especially in the equity side. It's like only investing in US stocks and not having international stocks. You likely will be fine. You'll be very diversified. You're just going to have a smaller menu of companies within that. But there are still enough companies, at least in the current iteration of these ESG type of funds, to build a diversified portfolio in different sectors. So I don't necessarily think it's too risky. It's much more difficult on the bond end of it than it is the equity end of it. But I don't think it's too risky if this is something that you're really convicted about. Now, you asked me my take on this approach. And I would say that I am independent, definitely not super conservative, not liberal. I probably lean more conservative in certain areas and much more liberal in other areas from a political spectrum. And I care about the environment, but I like my gas car. It works well for me. We recycle. Do I believe that recycling net really helps? I don't know. My intuition is probably not. I don't know. But my approach with my own investments and talking with clients and with you and millions of other people publicly is my preference would be to be more agnostic from an investment management standpoint and not go down this road. And then use my resources to directly support things that I do believe in. And that could be organizations that provide food for kids. And I've supported organizations that do eye surgery in Africa and organizations that build trails and support the national and state parks. My approach is that is too messy up there. There's not enough clarity as to who the good and bad players are. And I have to take care of my own house financially. So I don't mess with it on the financial end of it, on the investment management end of it. But I do use my resources, and this is what I would say to you, Tim, is it's okay to do the ESG, but if you choose not to, you can use your resources to fund organizations that you're much closer on the ground, you understand their governance, you may know people in them, and support what they're doing with the resources from your financial assets. I like that approach a lot better. One, because your primary thing is you need to take care of your family and eliminate the possibility of things going awry as much as you can. And so keeping the portfolio management part super simple and laser focused can help you achieve that. But you can always use your resources to try to make a better world and leave a better world for your children and for everyone else within your community or in the direct things that you do. I like that approach a lot better. It makes a lot more sense to me because I don't trust, and this is maybe jaded on my part, Tim, I don't trust a mutual fund company or provider or an agency or someone to tell me who is the good player and who is the bad player. All of this, in my opinion, is mostly marketing to fill a desire from someone like you. And I don't know if I trust them to pick who the players are that I should feel good about. I prefer to keep that agency for myself. Now, interestingly, Tim, the book I just finished, The Second Mountain, the last chapter or two focuses on how do we rebuild our communities? Because changing the world is always a micro thing. The way you change the world is first working on yourself and then working very micro. And in reading those chapters, I feel challenged. And how do I not just give money to organizations, but how can I have an impact with direct participation in doing something? And that's something I'm thinking about, and I would challenge you to think about as well, because giving money or supporting an ESG fund feels good, but it's a pretty passive way of doing something. And that's where my heart is right now, and I'm grappling with that and journaling on that. So those are my thoughts on ESG and trying to make a world a better place. Hopefully gave you my insight. All right, let's move on. Our next question comes from Scott, and it's about buying life insurance as you head into retirement. He said, "Hey, Roger, love the show. I've listened every podcast for the last 3 years." Cool. Welcome. I'm glad that you are part of us. My question has to do with the necessity of life insurance in retirement. My wife and I are age 63 and 62, recently retired, always had term insurance through our employer, never gave it much thought because it came out of our paychecks, and it was relatively inexpensive. We're about to purchase 15-year flat rate, $100,000 policies for each of us with a total cost of $1,300 a year. We like the idea that each of us would have an extra cushion and our 2 adult children in the event of an early death, but also wondering the wisdom of spending $20,000 for the next 15 years for life insurance when we expect to have more than $1.5 million in retirement funds with the policies, which would adequately support either of us combined with our Social Security. I've heard a lot of the discussion about this, but I was interested in your thoughts. It's a good question, Scott. Again, have you set the table of having a plan of record for you and your wife, assuming that you both live to a normal life expectancy or longer, that is feasible and you've made it resilient? One way of making it resilient, once you know you have a feasible plan that's organized, by the way, this is the whole point of the Rock Retirement Club, is to get you to this point, is now you have to make it resilient. And one of the ways that you make it resilient is you test what happens if one of us passes early. In fact, we have a month-long theme coming up called Going from 2 to 1. And you would create a what-if scenario and say, well, what happened if I passed away early? What impact does that have to my surviving spouse in terms of the feasibility of the plan that they're going to live out through the life? Basically, are they going to be okay? Because certain things happen if someone passes away early, right? If there's a pension and it's a life only, that could go away. Social Security, you're counting on 2 Social Security payments, both on their own record or a spousal benefit and the major earner. That will go away. You will have the highest of the 2. So you'll have 1 payment from Social Security, not 2. You're going to have different tax brackets, right? Right now, when you're married, you have a joint tax bracket. You're going to go to a single tax bracket. And from a household living standpoint, yes, the surviving spouse might spend less on an annual basis, but it's typically not going to be significantly less, right? Because the major expenses are pretty static. Home insurance, the house payment, utilities. None of that cares whether there's two people in the household or one person in the household. I just got an email about this from somebody that was single that was telling me I need to talk about this more. So the major payments aren't going to go down really at all or very significantly. Now, obviously, the surviving spouse could downgrade their house and not downgrade, but downsize their house, right-size their life, however you want to say it. But the major payments are all going to be there, car payment, etc. So if you have your plan of record, you can then create this what-if scenario, Scott, and then see, well, what happens given some reasonable assumptions if there's no life insurance, but we don't have this extra expense of $1,300 a year? Is my surviving spouse okay? And then what does it look like if we do have the life insurance and one of us dies early? Does it really help materially in the surviving person's life? You want to think through it and look at it within the framework of a plan of record so you can make a judgment call. Typically, it's not going to be crystal clear. It's just going to be a judgment call, Scott. But you want to do those two. You're right, because you're going to spend $20,000 over 15 years if both of you live. So we want to know, is this going to make you all okay? Another way that you might approach it, Scott, is to say, well, what's the real purpose of this $100,000? Is it for legacy? Is it to help replace some income? Is it to pay off a debt for something that we put in place? I mean, a good example is as we're breaking ground on our house, God willing, in August in Colorado, and I'm going to have this period of time where I'm owning two houses. Not super comfortable. What happens if I die prematurely? I'm going to evaluate life insurance because I have to fill this gap because I have this period of exposure that I have to solve for. And I don't know if you have anything like that going on in your life. So those are some of the things that I would think through. And then you also have to factor in, this may be your one decision on this of likely going forward, you're never going to get a better price than this, assuming that you're healthy and you're at decent rates. If you look at it this next year, you're going to be 1 year older, so it's going to be more expensive, and you or your spouse might have a health issue that comes up. So this is the one time to look at it. If it's really about, we're fine, but it might be nice, I would probably not do it. But that's my personal inclination, but I would think through it in this logical way. What is it they say about insurance? It's the most expensive thing you pay for unless you need it. If someone were to pass away in the next year or two, this would be the best deal you ever got, mathematically. But I would approach it from, will the surviving spouse be okay? Because $1,300 a month can go to creating experiences for the family that you might not otherwise do. And maybe you put this as, maybe you say no to this. Just use this as an example, just thinking off the top of my head, is let's say you say no to the insurance and you've walked through it in an organized way. And you say, you know what, if we don't have the insurance and one of us passes away, yeah, it would have been nice, but we're going to be fine, given our assets, et cetera, and all the things we talked about. If that's the case and you say no to the insurance, then I would challenge you, Scott, to say, okay, this $1,300 a year, this goes into what some of my friends call a fun money bucket. This is money that we have to spend, or we agree to spend, on gifting to the kids, renting a house to bring everybody together, something that creates experiences and memories. So if you don't do the insurance, I would challenge you to seriously consider that. Our next question comes from Joe, and this is around credit and retirement. Joe says, I retired at the end of 2021, so I no longer have any wage income. Lately, my credit card issuers have been asking for updates on my yearly income. The money I now collect from Social Security, pension, and retirement accounts is less than half of my former gross income. My question is, if I report this much reduced income amount to my creditors, will they reduce or close my lines of credit? That's a really important question, Joe, and not something that we've really done a theme on. We could probably do a whole monthly theme on credit in retirement. So I'm going to make a note of that. But congratulations on your retirement. So let's think about this. Whether you are retired or not, there are 5 components that go into what's called the FICO score, your credit score. They're your payment history, the amounts that you owe, the length of your credit history, the new credit that you've applied for, and your credit mix, meaning credit card versus mortgage versus line of credit, etc. Nowhere is there income. So in theory, your credit score doesn't really look at your income. But if you're seeking a new credit card or a new line of credit, they're going to ask you about your annual income. And with a lower income, you'll have what's considered a higher debt to income ratio. They're going to look at the debt that you have currently and the payments that you have to make on that debt. And they're going to compare that to the income that you're reporting to see what the ratio is. And what those ranges are, I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sure it's sort of a black box type of thing. Because essentially they're looking for, is this guy taking on too much debt and payments relative to the income he has to support that? So that does get factored in. Now, generally, when you're applying for credit, Joe, you have to answer these questions. Usually, once you have them set up, you don't get asked these questions again, but doesn't mean they can't ask. So if you don't answer the question, you may not be able to get credit limit increases, which might be something that you're interested in doing. And potentially, especially with the line of credit, they could change the limit that they're giving you based on the information that you gave. So if you don't answer it, then you're not going to get an increase for sure. But if you do answer it and you have much lower income, they could indeed lower the credit limit because they're managing their risk. Now, just so you know, all those income sources you listed, so security, pension, investment income, do count towards the annual income number that they're asking for. And if you have self-employment income, part-time work, seasonal work, that's going to count as well. So to your specific issue, choice one is, no, I'm just going to ignore this letter. If you do that, nothing may happen, but you're definitely not going to get an increase. But if you don't answer it, nothing should happen. They may ask you again, and then they may get more pointed about it, or they may just go away. If you do answer it, then that will go through their decision tree with whatever system that they're doing, and they just either note it for the record, or they do an updated debt to income ratio and communicate some adjustments. So not something that I'm familiar with, definitely something that we need to dive in and bring in an expert. And I know like on NerdWallet, there's a lot of great articles and we have links to them that we'll share in 6 Shot Saturday email. So you can look for those, Joe, and maybe that'll help you on your journey. All right, we have time for one more question, then we're going to go set a smart sprint. Our last question for today, anyway, comes from Richard. Hey, Nicole, I'm a longtime listener with another bit of feedback for Roger. And we love feedback, by the way, Richard. Even when it stings a little bit, I'm open to it. I learned this early on, and I think this is a great rule for all of us, is whenever we read a text or email, we have to make the assumption that the person loves us and all they have is the best for us. If you read an email, even if it's a little nasty, it lessens the blow, and then you can navigate handling that feedback. But I love feedback, and that's one thing great about 6 Shot Saturday is you can reply, and it comes directly to me. Anyway, Richard says, sorry to be a nag, but I think the first listener question below about living off dividends makes a very important assumption. Wouldn't you agree that dividend sources need to be diversified to be considered a safe source of income? What if the dividends were all from, say, Enron stock before they crash, or General Electric? I'll throw that one in there, which was an amazing dividend stock for decades, and now it's not. The question does say blue chip, but there have been examples of major blue chip companies that run into issues suddenly or sometimes over time. So I agree with Roger, assuming the dividend sources are diversified. By the way, the episodes where we hear from Nicole, too, are the best. And now that I am home and Nicole has figured out her sea legs with 3 kids and the school starting and everything else, Nicole will be on the show a lot more. So I'm excited about that. Keep up the great work. Richard, you are exactly correct in that when I talk about dividend income, and this is an assumption I've made inside my head that I may not have verbalized, is I believe in having a diversified portfolio of, in this case, equities that focus or respect the shareholder by paying dividends consistently, not buying an individual stock or a very small basket of individual stocks that pay dividends. That is an approach to go, and you perhaps can have a more enhanced dividend if you buy individual stocks or have a very focused portfolio, but you introduce risks that you don't see until you see them, right? General Electric is a good example, where the risk was always there, but it wasn't felt for 50 plus years when they went through a really bad period of time. So I would suggest that if you're going to use a dividend approach and you're going to rely on that income specifically for paying your bills, that you focus on a diversified portfolio My preference would be one that screens for companies that are very consistent in paying their dividends and have a long history of consistent increases in those dividends. And generally, they're going to have a screen to look at their ability to pay those dividends. And there are plenty of portfolios out there that have those type of screens. So you may have less dividend income than some alternatives, but they're going to be much more resilient to the economy because they are prudent managers of their financials. So you don't have these surprises. So I think that's a great point, Richard. And I always love your feedback. Thanks, buddy. All right, with that, let's move on to a smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to sit a little baby step you can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. All right, in the next 7 days, I want you to think about your affluence. What comes to mind when you hear the word affluent? Is it Jaguars and Porsches? Is it beautiful homes, money? I want you to think about your affluence, and I want you to challenge yourself about, do you have the most important affluence, and are you protecting and growing that affluence? And what I'm referring to is your time affluence. Pretty much every study says chasing more things doesn't bring happiness. I think we know that. But one thing that we also know is that having time affluence, which is time to pursue things that fill us up and enjoy life and make us more of who we are, does help bring happiness. And many times we can be wasteful with our time pursuing things or outward success, and that time doesn't give us the opportunity to pursue things that we truly enjoy. It's very easy to do that without ever noticing it and thinking about it. I noticed that and I thought about that when we went through purchasing this other lot. That first lot that we purchased was like a significant amount of money that's now in that lot that I need to hopefully get back. But it took a lot of work. It took a lot of time away from mountain biking, from Shauna, from Sherlock, from my friends to do the work I needed to do to be able to buy that lot. I wouldn't make that trade in hindsight. Time affluence. Challenge yourself. Are you focusing a little bit too much on accumulation? Well, if I just had X amount more, then I'd feel secure and confident in retirement. Maybe I just work one more year because we have inflation, we're in a bear market, whatever straw man you hold up, potential straw man, it may be true for you. I don't know. But challenge yourself, because if you build a feasible plan of record where you know that you're okay, that sort of one value of doing that puts it in front of your face. Now, you can choose not to believe the process that you just went through, but it puts it in front of your face and challenges you. So this week, I want you to think about time affluence and maybe look for, if I watch this TV show, I'm not chatting with my spouse or I'm not making a friend, and just look at how you're managing your time affluence. All right. I'm actually recording this on Sunday. We got home yesterday, and I'm going to go see my daughter just moved into a new home that she's renting from a family member. And she is happy as a clam because she had like 5 roommates and there were like 4 dogs in there. And so I haven't seen it yet because this all happened right as we were going to Colorado. So I'm excited to go see that. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and we'll chat next week. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance reference is historical and does not guarantee future results. All indices are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. Make sure you consult your legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions.